The fourth episode of the mini-series, The Dropout, takes us through the tactical decisions made by Elizabeth Holmes in order to procure funds for her startup, Theranos. Earlier, we had seen that Ramesh Sunny Balwani had come on board, bringing with him funding of $20 million. Now it is evident that Elizabeth Holmes wouldn't have allowed Mr. Balwani to be a part of her startup if the conditions hadn't become so adverse for her. She was being removed from her position as CEO. Elizabeth had done a trial on cancer patients with a prototype that didn't work. The board members, especially Don Lucas, thought that she was in need of guidance. But the Stanford dropout hadn't come this far just to give up her position, even if it meant keeping the board members in darkness. Elizabeth Holmes knew that she had no option other than to involve Ramesh Balwani. She lied about the fact that she didn't know Ramesh Balwani personally, and he was just an investor who was willing to invest $20 million in Theranos provided she was retained as the CEO of the company. Elizabeth proved beyond doubt that she was an expert schemer, but the question remained, how long could the business survive when the core foundation, i.e., their prototype, was not even close to being functional? Episode 4 of The Dropout begins in March 2010, with Dr. J. Rosen on his way to a meeting with the Walgreens board. Elizabeth pitches Theranos to Jay, who is Walgreens' medical director. She sells him with a concept of a wellness center that would utilize her blood testing technology. A few months later, Walgreens Executive Vice President Wade McQuillan allows Jay to visit Theranos headquarters as long as he brings lab expert Kevin Hunter to check out their labs. Before this visit, lab workers are told to stay in the lab unless instructed to leave. This upsets Ian, who is already frustrated about several changes in the company since Sunny became CEO. He goes to Sunny to complain about the firing of one of the lab workers and catches the name Project Beta on his desk. Sunny acts secretively when Ian mentions it. When the Walgreens executives arrive, it shocks Elizabeth to learn that Kevin came to look at their labs. She and Sunny put him off, which makes Kevin extremely suspicious, even more so than he already was when he learned that they had not yet gained FDA approval. Ian does some of his own snooping. He soon finds out that Project Beta is about partnering with Walgreens or another store to get Theranos product on the market. Ian is horrified to learn the plan, knowing the device isn't ready to be tested on people. He goes to Professor Channing Robertson to tell him what he discovered, only to learn that he already knew. Robertson's explanation is that the technology is almost there, and Elizabeth just needs to fast-track the business process. Ian knows the technology will still be years in the making, however. Elizabeth later gets a call from Robertson about Ian, so she leaves a meeting with Walgreens to surprise Ian in the lab. He confronts her about her heartless plan to test the machine on people. She claims he doesn't understand the business, but he levels that she doesn't understand the science. She responds by firing him. However, Theranos employees stand up for Ian the next day. If he is fired, they'll have to be fired too. So, Sunny calls Ian and offers him a job. He just won't tell him what the job is until he gets to the office. Elizabeth had promised Walgreens they could come see their labs the next morning. But when the Walgreens execs arrive, they catch her in a meeting with Safeway. In a high-stakes bluff, Elizabeth makes Walgreens wait over an hour, only to turn both Walgreens and Safeway down. She hurriedly gets ready to leave, implying that she's heading to CVS to close on a deal with them. CVS is Walgreens' biggest competitor, and Walgreens has been having trouble keeping up with the pharmacy. Wade thinks Elizabeth might be bluffing, but Jay talks him into making her an offer. Kevin insists that would be foolish without first seeing their labs, but Jay succeeds in persuading him. Later that day, Ian returns to the office. To his surprise, they have given him a new workspace at a desk. Disappointed, he looks up to see Elizabeth and Sunny celebrating in a meeting room. A few months later, Elizabeth meets with businessman George Schultz. She discloses that both Walgreens and Safeway have decided to invest millions into Theranos. It would mean everything, she says, to have George Schultz on their side as well. How did Elizabeth Holmes' influence drive J. Rosen of Walgreens? Dr. Rosen, who liked being called Dr. J, was the medical director from Walgreens who met Elizabeth Holmes and Ramesh Balwani when they came to pitch. Obviously, Elizabeth Holmes did not have a working prototype, so she had to find some other way to impress Dr. Rosen. She knew that, if she had him by her side, then he would act as her spokesperson, and eventually, other members would accept the deal. Elizabeth knew how to impress and influence people. There is a simple rule: if your subject matter is not up to the mark, then make the outer cover so attractive and captivating that the other person just keeps thinking about it. Humans have this habit of getting carried away with praise, and they develop a soft corner for the one who is making it. And that was the agenda of a shrewd Elizabeth Holmes. She tells Dr. J. Rosen that back in 1992, he had the foresight to persuade doctors to transmit records electronically, which eventually became a breakthrough. Catching him off guard, soaking in his own glory, she tells him that she too wants to achieve the same feat through her Edison machine and do good for the world like he did. She offers to open wellness centers where the patients would come for their low-cost blood tests. Dr. J. Rosen, after hearing all this, is totally on board. He is sure that a deal between Walgreens and Theranos would be beneficial for both companies. He meets Wade McQuillan, the executive vice president and chief financial officer of Walgreens. Wade, at that time, wanted to close a deal with Express Scripts and needed to be convinced to sign a contract with Theranos, as he questioned their credibility. How did Elizabeth Holmes convince Walgreens to invest in Theranos Project Beta? Walgreens was in a vulnerable position, considering there was an ongoing recession. Dr. J hooks Wade McQuillan by saying that Theranos might be talking to CVS too, the pharma giant who was also their competitor. Wade finally agrees, but he wants someone who knows about labs to look into the matter and assess things. Walgreens hired Kevin Hunter, an expert who was to look into the authenticity of the blood tests that Theranos was planning to do with their Edison machine. Obviously, Elizabeth was still years away from developing a working prototype, so she couldn't afford to take Walgreens' team into her labs. She fabricates a story about how she is uncomfortable showing her lab to Kevin Hunter because he previously worked for Quest Diagnostics. Elizabeth Holmes tells Dr. J that she had reasons to believe that Quest Diagnostics wanted to copy their technology. Wade McQuillan also comes down to Palo Alto and agrees with Kevin that unless and until they get access to the lab, they wouldn't go ahead with the deal. But Dr. J is blindfolded by the charisma and flattery of Elizabeth Holmes, so much so that he is just not ready to give up on the deal. Ramesh Balwani and Elizabeth Holmes thwart the Walgreens team and try the same route of flattery and adulation with Wade. It doesn't work on him, so they take a different route. Elizabeth Holmes tries to get an upper hand in the deal by somehow showing that they were not the desperate ones, as they were also in talks with Stephen Bird, the CEO of Safeway, a supermarket chain. The next day, both Safeway and Walgreens came to the Theranos office. Elizabeth Holmes comes and tells Wade McQuillan that Theranos had decided to not go ahead with the deal. Wade, Dr. J, and their colleagues think that Safeway might have bagged the deal. But while waiting in the portico, when they talk to Stephen Bird, they come to know that they didn't get the deal. Just then, Elizabeth and her team come down from the office, talking purposely about a flight to Boston. It was then that everybody realized that Theranos might be signing a deal with CVS Pharmacy. She did this so that both Walgreens and Safeway could think that they were losing out on an opportunity and then come back with a lucrative offer. So, without checking the authenticity of the tests, Walgreens agreed to become a part of Project Beta. Dr. J always believed that to be in business, Walgreens had to adapt according to the changing times. He tells Wade that these new breeds of entrepreneurs don't overthink and aren't easily intimidated. They agreed that maybe Elizabeth Holmes was bluffing about the whole CVS pharmacy thing, but they couldn't let the deal slip from their hands. On the other hand, Ian Gibbons, the head chemist of Theranos, has a conflict of interest. He comes to know about Project Beta and goes to meet Channing Robertson, an old friend who was also a board member. He tells him that they were not even close to making the Edison machine fully functioning and that they were risking the lives of innocent people. Channing tells Elizabeth Holmes about the meeting, who instantly fires Ian Gibbons, though later she has to take back her decision as the other scientists refuse to work in the absence of their beloved chemist. You feel bad for Ian Gibbons because he only knew science and was alien to the politics of the world. just like an artist who doesn't know how to sell his art and, in turn, has to adhere to the whims and fancies of the business people who come on board to decide the fate of his creation. Often you find these pure-hearted people in helpless situations, and that's when you realize how important it is to play the game, because there is no alternative to it. His lab, his equipment, the camaraderie that he had with other scientists, and obviously the joy of creating something, are snatched from him when he is given another place to sit in the office and is restricted from entering the lab. The astute businesswomen found a way to make the scientists work, who were protesting when Ian Gibbons was fired, and yet not let him meddle with the proceedings. Maybe that's how business is done, and there is no place for people who uphold values and ethics in this brutal system. The next episodes of The Dropout will focus on how Elizabeth Holmes digs her own grave, as sooner or later, the flaws in the Edison machine will come to light.